What's up, guys? Let's have some fun today. Let's lighten things up a bit here while still proving a point, because I know that in general I cover a lot of very serious and heavy topics. In fact, recently we have talked about the theology of bloodlust. We have talked about Yahweh's identity crisis. We have talked about how the Bible absolutely hates women and many other things, as you guys know. And I'm glad I talk about those things. I think it's important and I know it helps people. But I still chuckle each time because without fail, one of the first comments back from believers is that I, Brandon, the atheist, is taking the Bible too literally. Not the Christian who, because of the Bible, believes that when they die, they will magically appear in some state that is like themselves but not themselves before an omniscient judge who still has to check a book to see if they're in it, so he knows where to send them, either to eternal conscious torment or annihilation, or if he will welcome them into paradise where he made a mansion for them and there's streets of gold. But no, it's me that takes the Bible too literally. The point I want to do with today's video is, if you're going to tell me verses like that are too literal, that God's command for genocide was me being too literal, if God's command for slavery was me being too literal, if God commanding rapist punishment was me taking the book too literal, let's look at all the things you as a believer 100% believe are literal from your Bible. And we're talking ridiculous things. Hybrid beings and giants, fire-breathing monsters, talking animals, teleporting angels. Like, it's not me taking this insane book too literally. It's this insane book making insane literal claims that the Christian cherry picks for what is metaphor, what is poetic, what is allegory, and what is true or historical or meant to be taken literally. And you know how you can know they're not using any kind of good, consistent measurement? The things that look good in our current society today are fine to be left literal, where the things that we have outgrown as a society are now metaphorical or even warnings to us about bad behavior. But a few hundred years ago, when these things were accepted as fine, the Bible was actually being used and taken literally to continue to endorse these things. And we see that all throughout its history. So what's more likely? That your current interpretation of the Bible and what is literal is exactly as it was always meant to be. It just took 2,000 years to get to you and your proper understanding. Or that all people for all time have taken this book and other holy books like it and this religion and other religions like it and warped it to meet them at their current state for what they want to accomplish, their definitions of right and wrong, how they want to utilize power, etc. I think we should be able to understand that pretty simply. But this was a big preamble. Let's get to some examples. Again, just fun. Let's talk about some of the crazy things in the Bible that are 100% meant to be taken literally. And my goal is to go really fast. We'll do some categories. Let's talk about giants and hybrid beings. Well, first we have to talk about the Nephilim. This is found in the first book of the Bible. Sons of God came down and raped the daughters of man because apparently God made angels with penises and a reproductive cycle. Even with his infinite foreknowledge, he never thought maybe I should just not do that so all these innocent women don't get raped and we don't get this half-breed that become giants, the Nephilim, that get so out of hand that that's one part of Christianity's excuse for why the flood had to happen. Don't worry, Brandon. You're always so silly using words like genocide. God just had to kill the half-breeds that he let happen. Yeah, much better. Now, a lot of people know about the Nephilim. Not a lot of people know about the distinction with other creatures like the Rephaim, the Anakim, the Imam, and the Zamzummim. I know those words sound crazy, but these are giant clans from Canaan. They have supernatural strength and size. There's a lot of distinctions there. We could get into it. That's not the purpose of this video. Just going quickly, sharing some ridiculous examples. But we have Goliath, over 9 foot tall, taller than any human that we've actually been able to account for ever. And we have Og of Bashan. He was a giant king that needed a 13-foot iron bed, the last of the Rephaim. The dimensions of that bed are cited to be physical proof of such. Again, this was taken literally. And here's the deal. For many Christians, there's so many categories, but there's a few things going on right now. There's really progressive Christians that have just left the Old Testament behind there. Like, I don't care what it says. It's metaphorical. It's allegorical. It's a warning. It's pointing us to Jesus. It doesn't need to be contended with, which is disingenuous and dishonest. And we're going to talk about that in a separate video. But then you have this other group of Christians that I kind of want to point out today, which are Christians that have no problem taking a literal worldwide flood. 40% of American Christians believe in the literal account of things like the flood and the Tower of Babel. But again, I'm the crazy one for reading clearly when God allows people to be owned as property for life. There's just no argument here. But even outside of the fundamentalist evangelicals, there's a high percentage of people that still take these kinds of things like the Nephilim or Goliath or Og as absolute, literal, historical events being described in the Word of God. So what does it tell you about these kinds of Christians when they cannot allow themselves to accept the other very clear, literal, horrendous things said in these same books by the same divine authorship? It suggests cherry picking to the highest degree because, again, they cannot understand how their God could be so evil, and they would know it under any other conditions except the fact that it happens to be the religion they believe in. There's a different promise of a different kind of God. There's a New Testament with different words, and so they ignore this. They don't care about this. They let it go, but then they still have the audacity to argue in the way that they do when I bring up clearly in context issues with the Bible, both Old and New Testament. Let's continue though. Our second category here, let's get into animals. We could talk about the serpent in Eden. If we are playing a correct context game, there is no way that this was meant to be the same kind of devil that becomes the villain in the New Testament. In fact, it's only because of a remark in Revelation that ever got transposed back onto the serpent. The serpent is literally just a serpent, supposedly with legs, I guess, and can speak. Pretty normal stuff. Now, if you believe in the Genesis account of Adam and Eve, the creation myth, as literal, you have to believe in a literal talking serpent as well that was just there. And who, by the way, said nothing untrue. Only Yahweh does in that story. We could talk about Balaam's talking donkey. See this video if you want to get into the weeds with that, because yes, it is meant to be literal, and it is absolutely insane. Not only how problematic that is, but the immorality of that entire story and what it says about God's nature and character. How about the giant fish that swallows Jonah? I guess there's nothing impossible to believe about a giant fish. There's some weird things in the sea. Oh, there's that part where God is punishing everyone around Jonah for Jonah's disobedience, because we have so much free will. So then he gets tossed into the ocean. That means God makes these other fishermen commit murder, or at best, an assisted suicide, just so he can calm his wrath. But we're not even to the crazy part of the story. Then the fish that God sends swallows him, and he's fine there for 3 days until he is thrown up. Some even say that he died there and was resurrected. That's what's being discussed, by the way. Okay, yeah, no, we know that Jonah was there for 3 days in the belly of the fish, but he couldn't have survived, so, God resurrected him. I've literally heard this exact phrasing, and it's hilarious to me that people believe their God would resurrect someone, but couldn't or wouldn't have the power to just keep them alive in the belly for 3 days. But again, guys, I'm the one being too literal when I point out that clearly women were allowed to be raped by this immutable character of God so long as the father is compensated for the property damage, the broken hymen, because he owns his daughter and her virginity as property. You guys see what I'm going for here? I don't want to have to keep spelling it out. It's insane, right? In Isaiah, we see depictions of real flying serpents from the wilderness. Now, some people have tried to link this up to some kind of desert-dwelling demon, or we could talk about the Leviathan or Behemoth mentioned in Job. Now, Job gets tricky because even though there's some things that we're supposed to believe about this God, and it's supposed to be this answer for the problem of suffering or the meaning of life and all of this other philosophical or poetical things that we get from this book, it is still God making claims about the real world, about his creation. He's bragging to Job about what Job doesn't know, that he, God, as the creator of everything, does. So maybe I'll give you a pass on this, but the overwhelming specific detail about these creatures in this book, in the nature of which God is explaining about his creation, leads me to believe it's meant to be taken literally. So the Leviathan then is a sea monster with impenetrable armor that is fire-breathing, a dragon, where the Behemoth is a giant land creature who has a tail like a cedar tree. So no, that's not a hippo or an ox. Again, I'm not going to die on the hill if you are dead set on taking this as some kind of exaggerated exaggeration from God, but it's weird. It doesn't make any sense. And if you think I'm being too literal there, what about the divine council where Satan, the accuser, the adversary is coming before the Lord as he pleases, coming and going in heaven, making bets and deals with God about exactly how much torture he can do, exactly how many children he can kill, all by the way. But again, I'm the crazy guy for talking about how this God or the people who worshipped him really believed in these obvious mythological creatures. Speaking of mythological creatures, let's talk angels. Remember, I'm taking those verses too literal when God, not some other commander, commands his commanders to do actual genocide, to kill every living thing, spelling out specifically that will be the men, the soldiers, the women, the children, and yes, even the animals. We have 1,000 reasons to know it's not hyperbole, and that it is indeed meant to be literal. But the same people who try to tell me I'm taking it too literally are also talking about those sons of God that came down and created the Nephilim, are also talking about that divine council that I mentioned in Job, who also believe in the cherubim that fly around with flaming swords. Forget the cherubim, what about the seraphim, like from Isaiah's vision? Beings with 6 wings flapping frantically around God's throne, screaming how glorious he is? What about the angels who visit Lot? They eat, they drink, they talk. They also must have been pretty attractive because all the town people wanted to rape them. They also must be pretty horrific because they really respected Lot's hospitality, offering his virgin daughters to the crowd to be gang raped so that these powerful hybrid creatures could be protected by little old Lot. But don't worry, they didn't let it go that far. Instead, they blinded everybody with their magical powers. And yes, we are literally supposed to believe that happened right before God rained down fire on these cities to destroy them. What about the angel, or is it God? Christians can never agree, who argues with Jacob in the middle of the night, again, meant to be taken literally. Or in Jude, where we get Michael, the archangel, fighting with Satan or the devil or Lucifer, depending how you want to interpret this, although it definitely would have been a Satan since it's referencing something that happened in the Old Testament. But in this story, they're fighting over the body of Moses, the very one that God himself buried. And yes, all of that is meant to be taken literally. But it shouldn't be surprising. I mean, that's super common, right? Different spiritual celestial beings on the opposite side of good and evil arguing over a dead prophet's corpse happens every day. Or going back to the story of Balaam, one of the details I love is that it's the talking donkey who is able to see the sworded angel first. And good thing he did, by the way, because that angel says, if you'd come much further, I was going to kill you. Angels love to kill, by the way. An angel of the Lord is sent from God as punishment for David, who was incited by God or the devil. If you can figure out that contradiction, let me know. And then God gives David a genie-like suggestion. Here's 3 things you can choose from your punishment, because you know I hate counting. Don't take censuses again. David chose the one that would affect him least, and guess what it did? It killed, 170,000 people? And it wasn't done. It was going to destroy everyone until what? God came in and said, whoa, I think your work is done today. Yep, that's a literal story in the Bible that we are to believe literally happened. Oh, and actually, I'm sorry, I'm conflating that. It was 70,000 men, not 170. That number is actually 185,000, but that's a whole different event where there's another singular angel that takes on the entire Assyrian army. I always just find it so funny, though, that power is right there, but then other times they have to hold up Moses' arms so that they'll win a battle. When his arms get tired and they come down, they start losing as in people start dying. Lift them back up. Again, something to be believed literally. Or all the other tricky things God had to do to win battles for his people, like with Gideon and confusing the men, making his enemies blind, or that council that he holds where one of the beings up in heaven says, hey, let's lie. Let's just be liars. And God's like, yeah, let's do that. Go do that. And so they lie to win the battle. But I guess sometimes God doesn't have time for all the tricks and games, so just sends an angel, 185,000 overnight, no problem. But God doesn't always use death, which is funny because it's a direct contradiction from what is said previously in the Bible. Let me cover some of the death-defying things that happen in the Bible. Elijah, even when dead, is so filled with God's magic that when his bones accidentally touch another dead person, that person reanimates. Truly resurrects directly upon contact. There's no metaphor there. There's no symbolism there. We are just meant to believe that this prophet who asked for a double portion of what Elijah got, and apparently got it to the point that he is so powerful, even after his soul has been removed from his body, that just his bones have the power to raise the dead. Jesus had that kind of power too. Remember the lady who grabs his cloak and is healed? His garments alone. In fact, I think in Acts, Peter's shadow heals someone. These people are powerful, literally so. But don't forget about Enoch, who doesn't have to face death. He's taken. So is Elijah in a chariot of fire or whirlwind, depending again on some interpretation issues. And of course, there's the widow's son raised by Elijah, and there is Lazarus in the New Testament. There's a lot of rising from the dead. Oh, I almost forgot the most amazing rising of the dead. Not Jesus. It was actually that zombie episode we get in Matthew, where all the saints come out of their graves and walk around Jerusalem in the middle of the night. It's insane, but it's meant to be taken literally. So yeah, we see not only all the ways God can kill, but all the ways that God can save. Pretty neat. Although there's a lot more ways that God can kill, like miraculously having the ground open up to eat the people who participated in Korah's rebellion. Or maybe God just gets bored and he wants to spice things up, or maybe not spice, salt, like when he has Lot's wife turned to a pillar of salt as her execution and punishment for turning around. In fact, it's kind of morbidly fun to look at all of the creative ways. Hey, God's a creator God, lest we forget. All the creative ways that God kills people. Did we talk about the time that God threw stones from heaven to make sure that no soldiers got away in a battle? What about when he drowned an entire army by hardening their hearts so they would go and chase down the people they just let go? But God is literally parting a sea and times everything just right so his people get out and the Egyptians go in and the waters go and they all die. That was a neat one, and a literal one. Or another neat trick that God did is when he wanted to kill innocent people, all the firstborns, as a plague in Egypt, unless you had the special protection of blood painted over your doorposts that he only told one side to do. And so then he went and he killed every firstborn Egyptian, which not all were kids, but many were, and even the firstborn of the animals. So again, something that's to be taken literally here. That was another angel death though. Man, I'm getting redundant. My bad. And God does send fire a lot. I'll list some verses for that. Oh, he used poisonous snakes. That's interesting. Being struck dead when that guy caught the ark that was slipping. Or when God sends bears to kill 42 children that made fun of his prophet for being bald. Or when God gives Samson super strength. Again, remember, something we're supposed to believe is literal, where he kills 1,000 men with a jawbone, or pushes down the pillars for the great suicide that kills so many people. Sometimes we don't even know the cause of death that God is using. I mean, Ananias and Sapphira just fall over dead when they lie. And God does love his disease. Don't forget about all the diseases he sends and uses, and all the plagues and all the famines and all the droughts. Trumpets, magical trumpet blasts that make walls fall down. Can't forget about that. Oh, and silly me, the flood, his absolute preferred method until he talks himself out of it and puts a rainbow in the sky to make sure it never happens again. Not that he will never kill everybody again, not that he will never genocide again, not that he will never not end the world again. All of those things are promised. He just gets a lot more comfortable with fire than he does with water. And I've barely scratched the surface, but I don't want to be boring. So let's move on to a different category. What are some other funky cosmic events in general? Feeding everybody for a very long time by sending floating down bread, essentially from heaven. That was a cool trick. In fact, that whole series of things we're supposed to believe is literal are all pretty neat. Like Moses goes up and his face shines bright because he was in the presence of God. Or God turning into a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night to lead people. Because when you're cursed to wander for 40 years, I guess you still need something to follow. Or how water came out of a rock when struck. The sun stands still for Joshua, so, they can genocide more people. There's a burning bush that doesn't even consume itself with fire. Aaron's staff becomes a snake. Man, we should have just parked in Exodus for a lot of this. By the way, it wasn't just Aaron's staff that turned into a snake. The Egyptians were able to do the exact same magic trick. In fact, there's just a lot of magic in the Bible. Let's talk about that. But hold on, before I get too far off track, we had God's disembodied writing hand on the wall, just predicting doom in an ominous way right before he does it. It's not like there's a theme or a moral here. Or even his most wimpy miracle, I think it's Elisha's axe that floats in water. It's a big deal, though. A lot of cool little miracles happen with Elijah, like where an angel bakes a cake for him, or how birds literally brought him food and meat, or how he even hears the whisper of God, which, by the way, many people heard the voice of God. Christians today all have to pretend they can hear God as a voice inside their head, but he used to just speak audibly, literally from the heavens for all to hear. What happened to that? Or all those little tests that are done in the Bible, for God that doesn't like to be tested. My personal favorite being Gideon's fleece. Is it dry or is it wet? I don't know. What's God's will going to be? Such a cool miracle. Just like finding car keys. Forget all the starving people. Forget about all the trafficked children. God's got fleece and car keys to attend to. But let's get back to that magic, because again, a lot of people believe in things like Jesus's miracles. But what about all the actual straight up magic? Again, like the Egyptians being able to turn their staffs into snakes. Because back then, that's just something that was a given, like witches. I mean, you have multiple verses saying to make sure you kill witches. So they must have been real. More verses that talk about not seeking out a wizard or a sorcerer. Witches, wizards, sorcerers. In fact, one of those witches has special witch powers of necromancy, which is used by Saul in the Bible. And it worked, because who does Saul call up? Samuel, who was dead. And they actually speak. This isn't a moral story or a metaphor. This is just a typical Friday, biblically speaking. And then all the divination and soothsaying and fortune telling that goes on in the Bible. You have Joseph's silver cup. In fact, Balaam was a professional diviner. That's why he was being sought out in the first place. Also, I just have to point it out, going back to the Egyptians being able to do the whole staff to snake thing, they were also keeping up with the plagues for a while. They were able to summon their own frogs and turn their own water to blood. But you know what they couldn't get past? Gnats. That's just one plague too far. That was above their pay grade. They just didn't learn that particular spell. So God is the all-powerful one. Aaron's rod, Moses' staff, these are actual tools of magic. There's familiar spirits and casting lots, dream interpretations, astrology. There's magic healings and elixirs, magical elixirs that, reverse poison and things like that. And plenty of curses. Enchantments and charms are repeatedly warned against, meaning that they were known, believed in, and real. And then there's that story in Acts 19 where it talks about some of the early Christians who had, been practicing magic, brought their books together to burn them all. And then there's all the crazy stuff God does. We're so limited today in getting to see God's power close up, but back in the day, God would just do anything, having tea parties with Abraham, doing a little fashion runway walk in front of Moses, sending delusions. God liked to do that, driving people crazy like Nebuchadnezzar, or depressed like he did to Saul, or angry and hardened heart like he did to the Pharaoh and many other people. But okay, we've gone through a lot. Let's move on to one last category before we close out. This is all the things God claims he will literally do. He just hasn't gotten around to yet. Let's talk about some of the end time stuff. The sun will go dark. The moon will turn to blood. The stars will fall to earth. Now, I know you and I know that that can't literally happen, but the guys who wrote the Bible didn't. The sky will split apart. Mountains and islands will disappear. Massive earthquakes across the whole earth, because again, we didn't know about plate tectonics yet. There will be monsters like the beast or Antichrist, depending on, again, whole lot of different belief systems going on. There will be locusts with human faces. That'll be pretty neat to see. Oh, they also have scorpion tails. And yes, they're meant to be taken literally because they come from the earth to torment humans for 5 months. There's 200 million horsemen that will kill a third of the human population. This is a supernatural army, and their horses will have the heads of lions, by the way. Oh, and they'll be breathing fire, smoke, and sulfur. Then you have the actual 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. You have dead people rising for final judgment, the 2 witnesses that resurrect and descend publicly, a scene where literally all people will be bowing before God. New Jerusalem will physically ascend down and be on the earth. And then you get the creation of new heavens and new earth and all the other things that go along with heaven. We could spend an entire episode talking about the craziness of that, except here's the deal, guys. All of that, everything I have said, with the exception of maybe some of the stuff in Job, is by definition, by genre, by important details that have to follow later from certain lineages, etc. Like maybe I didn't do a great job talking about why we can know all these things are literal, but I was careful. And if I got one or two wrong, let me know, and I will definitely add a pinned comment. Maybe being too literal is not a good excuse for me bringing up the real issues with the nature of this God in the way that I do it. I just wanted this video out there so I can point back to it anytime I get that insane comment that, by the way, most people when they utilize it, they don't know what the supposed correct context is. They don't know what the metaphor or allegory is supposed to be pointing to, what it's symbolic of. It is just a thought stopper. It is just a quick constructed brick wall. It is fingers in the ears. It is head in the sand. It is not wanting to deal with the reality of what your belief would logically conclude in. So that's it. I'll see you Tuesday with a new video, and until then, keep thinking. I wanted to personally thank my top tiers of support: my Iconoclast, Ann, Boris, GVI, Jimmy, Joe, Kaboga, Matthew, Perry, Sean, and Steve; my Humanist heroes, Craig, James, Jared, Christy, and Matthew; my Atheist advocates, Adquitar, Caleb, Dan, David, Drew, Jeff, Jeffrey, Julie, Malcolm, Paul, Sparky, and Thomas; as well as all of my secular scholar patrons. If you believe in the mission of this channel or you just enjoy its content, please consider joining these fine people.